I saw the red flasher. Good afternoon, and welcome to the special council meeting, January 22nd, 2024. This meeting is called to order, and I note that we do have quorum. There is one agenda item, the Kentville Crossing Project Initiation Request, and I would accept a motion on the proposed agenda, please. Councillor Zabian, thank you. And Councillor Huntley, thank you. All those in favor? Those opposed? The motion is carried. Thank you very much. Today we have a request from Brighter Communities on behalf of developer Mitch Bryson to develop the Kentville Crossing on PID 5551774. And I will hand this over to our interim CAO, Louis Coutinho, to give us a briefing on the staff memo.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to members of council. Bryson Developments is obviously seeking an expedited planning process, to make changes to both the MPS and the LUB to allow for a multi-unit development along the frontage of the PID 5551774. And council, we met with the developer and his planner probably about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, and he expressed a desire to get a development here in the town. The crux of the matter here for council's consideration is the timeline. Now, none of the processes will be affected. We're still going to go through the required processes that council expects out of planning and development. The only thing that's being affected is a timeline, so that the developer, when council, should you agree to the timeline, that the developer can get on with his engineering drawings and whatnot. And I won't steal their thunder, but I think the plan is to break ground sometime in the spring of 2025. But any delay with getting it done just means that the developer falls that much further behind. So the land is currently designated and zoned industrial, and requires a change to both the municipal planning strategy and the land use bylaw. Bryson Developments is seeking planning policy changes that permit multi-residential buildings on the subject property. So by authorizing staff to initiate this planning process, council will demonstrate its willingness to consider changes to the MPS. And by the way, the MPS and the LUB would be done concurrently. That's the hope that staff can accomplish both, and we discussed it, and we can. There are some challenges, of course, but we're keen on seeing something like this happen in this town. The secondary plans, and I'll let the developer speak to that. There's a secondary plan that the town has been talking about, but as you know, the process usually takes 1 to 2 years. So the developer will talk about that part of the process and how he will tie in with what we are doing with our secondary plans. I think with that as an introduction, I'll turn that over probably to our, I don't know whether we want to have our planner first or we want to have the developer. We'll start with you. Okay. So Crystal Fuller is the developer's planner, and she will start the presentation to council. Thank you.
You're good to go.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, Your Worship and members of council. First off, thank you very much for having this special meeting. We appreciate you making the time. I feel fortunate that we didn't have any snow or weather, and that you're all able to be here. So do I move the screen from the keyboard? Okay, perfect. So I'm just going to walk you through a brief presentation about why we're bringing this to you today, and a little bit of technical information. And then Mr. Bryson will have some remarks as well. What the purpose of this is, and I think, Louis, you did a great sorry, I'm not used to calling you Louis CAO, okay, he knows, did a good job giving an overview of why we're here today. This is not a presentation about the complete development with all the information that would be required for your technical team. This is simply what in many municipal units they call an initiation report, because it is a plan amendment. Those are discretionary at council. Development agreements, rezonings, you have to, the public or anybody who wants to apply for them, they have that right, and then they're appealable through the Utility and Review Board. Plan amendments are something that council controls, and by giving, considering this request, and if ultimately you initiate it, allows staff to spend time on moving this through a process to amend your municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw amendment. And it also indicates to the developer an openness to this approach. And before the developer spends a considerable amount of money doing all the technical studies, the traffic studies, the servicing studies, you're well aware, this gives an initial indication of openness if you're willing to consider even the amendments at this time. So that's really why we're here today. And then secondarily, it's really about an expedited timeline, or a timeline that is reasonable so that the developer can move forward with his project in a timely fashion. So where are we talking about? This is where we're talking about. So it's sort of just before Access Nova Scotia. On this parcel of land, the developer, Mr. Bryson, has purchased the land, is now the property owner, and is looking to move forward with some plans on it. So just in terms of your land use bylaw, that's the outline of the property, so you can kind of see where it is. It is in an industrial designation and in an industrial zone, as Louis said, which requires there to be some thinking about where it could go. We're clearly looking here for a residential zoning, but more than that, we're looking for lands and the enabling legislation to ultimately have the Kentville crossing, which Mayor Snow referred to earlier. And I'll show you a little bit about what that could look like, using Windsor as an example. And I think many of you have probably already seen it. Some of you have great knowledge of Windsor. But just to remind you of what that might look like. So I have to stress that this is a preliminary plan. This is just the beginnings of it. That being said, Bryson and Design Point have put a great deal of thought in here and have put some preliminary engineering to it. That doesn't mean it can't change and shift a little bit over time, but this would be the bigger vision for the property, or something very similar to this. So I can't walk and point, but you can see Park Street. I could walk and point, but then you couldn't hear me. There you see Park Street. You see where there's some larger lots just off of Park Street, then a road that would go up and then connect into a variety of densities of residential.
Sorry, Crystal, where is Park Street? Is it that one?
Can I?
Yeah, please, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's here.
okay, that's Park Street. Okay, gotcha.
I would have pointed,
I was looking at it, just wasn't on.
yeah.
Yeah.
And Donald Hill's Collector is the other side of that. Do you want me to point?
On the right side, yeah, got this one.
You got it?
Yeah, please.
Right here, and then those are the gullies and streams.
Yeah, okay.
Okay? If everybody's oriented to that, my apologies for wandering up to the screen. Perfect. Mayor Snow. So this is obviously part of that larger West End considerations that we've talked about before here at council. I think I was here December of last year, sort of talking about some of the considerations for secondary planning. And when you have these large swaths of land, you know, often councils and municipalities sort of think about how they want that developed. With the pressure, the development pressures out there right now, being driven by housing need, which we'll talk about in a minute, you're now getting a request to do something on these lands. And I do understand that there is an intention, perhaps through your half funding application, to do secondary planning at some point, potentially. But that hasn't been announced, at least publicly, yet. So you haven't started your secondary planning. And we haven't been apprised of when you may or may not start that. But in my experience doing secondary plans, they often take, like a really fast one is 2 years. Maybe you can get through it in a year if you're really, really efficient, but that's not been my experience with them because it involves significant community engagement. And Mr. Bryson just can't wait 2 years. That's why we're here today. Just can't wait 2 years to respond to the need, and you probably can't wait 2 more years to have units. So the intention would be, you see on this that you see some smaller lots down towards Park Street. The intention at this point would be just to convert this all into multi-unit, 2 apartment buildings, probably 3, maybe 4, depending, once we get into the detailed design, maybe for around 300 units in this general area.
300 units in that first area as you come in, the yellow area
Yeah,
right there?
we're gonna, phase 1. Yeah, something like that. Again, if you give permission for this to proceed, more detailed information will be provided, but it would go to, the request is for it to go to a residential designation, R4, and then more information will be provided. And in talking to Kirsten before she left, we anticipate it would go through a site plan approval process, but again, your staff don't have a whole lot of information at this point. They just know what we're looking to do. A full application would come in if this is initiated today. It's also really important to understand that the remainder, the part that's indicated as remainder, the intention would be for that to be more fully developed, probably similar to the site plan there it is, site plan I showed you. What we are very cognizant of is that if you do a secondary plan, whatever is done here should not unduly restrict the planning for the whole area. So phase 1, the access route in there, I mean, it's really the only place you can go. It still offers lots of flexibility to do the planning on the remainder parcel. The remainder parcel is that yellow area in yellow. So it's to create a Kentville crossing. I don't know if that's the formal name yet, but that's what we're calling it, and I think that is probably what you're looking at. I'm looking at Mitch. That's sort of what you're looking at calling it. The focus, again, is on seniors and empty nesters. That's Mr. Bryson's sort of target market, and he, last time I talked to him, he said he had 150 people on his waiting list in Windsor, maybe even be bigger now. Provide a variety of housing types, so singles, semis, leased communities, smaller units. They've been very popular in Windsor for people who've left their homes and their kids have left and they want a smaller home that they don't have to worry about. So that market is good, but it also has duplexes, there's some fourplexes, there's 6 and 8 unit story apartment buildings, there's a community center, there's a variety of elements in it. In other local communities, I just wanted to give you a sense of what the density might look like. So in Wolfville, they just completed a secondary plan, which took them about 2-ish years. They approved 670 units on 32 acres, which is about 20 units per acre. In Windsor, the crossing, I didn't have a chance today to get the exact numbers, but just sort of as an estimate, there's about 1,500 units permitted or constructed on about 200 acres, plus there's more under consideration and more land that is being looked at for viability of different housing types. It's a big development. So I would encourage you really to go take a look at it if you haven't. And you can't really see some of the connectivity that's going to happen, but if you go to the crossing, look at Community Way, it's going to connect down to Payzant, which is where Avonview and the hospital is. It's creating a very connected, integrated community. Right now, if you were out in Garland's Crossing, we were just talking about earlier, you have to drive way around to come to the hospital. So connectivity is an absolutely critical thing that it's providing, as well as lots of housing. So in Kentville, there's about 100 acres there, and Mr. Bryson is seeking around that 20 units an acre kind of level that he has in the other 2 developments, which is a mid-density kind of development. So I just wanted to show you the crossing because we're calling it the Kentville crossing. Its namesake is in Windsor. This is probably 10 years into Windsor, maybe a little more, a little less. But that's what Windsor's developed into. I wish I could point to your screen. I wish I had a pointer. But I talked about community. Do you mind if I go and point at your screen?
Please.
Sorry for the audience.
Really,
Is-
is a mouse move
There's no mouse here.
on the keyboard?
This, okay.
Does that give you a mouse?
Oh, it does. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Dave. So that's the community way I was talking about. That will be built in the not too distant future and turned over to the municipality. A lot of this is built. This is where sort of 6-story buildings are being constructed adjacent to existing lower density residential. And it integrates fairly well, very well. Because there's lots of open space around the 6-story buildings. I keep on saying 8 stories because this is an 8-story building that's been approved here. This is a private community center that has been approved by the municipality that provides services to the whole of the crossing. These are some of those smaller, very popular units that are sort of, the least community. Whoops. Let me just go back here. You can see that there's a tremendous amount of open space. Now, all of this open space has not been provided by Bryson, but a lot of it has. So this space, there's a trail system that you can see through here that Bryson privately maintains. This park is part of it. There's here. This area has been rezoned appropriately and is starting to go through the tentative subdivision process. This is a stormwater management pond, which can be a very nice amenity. There's a lot here. There's a lot of density here. It is a new community, and it's fundamentally reshaping what I was going to say is the town of Windsor, but it's the municipality of West Hants now. And it's a great location to be central, near services, near, obviously, hospitals and grocery stores, all that sort of thing. So it's this vision that he's looking to replicate, though not exactly the same. Obviously, you just can't take this and plop it on your landscape. It will have to be designed and engineered to fit into this circumstance. But it's this vision of having an integrated, well-planned community with open space, with different kinds of housing, with good connectivity, something good for seniors and empty nesters, and having a variety of different forms. And some people really do want to be in apartment buildings, and some people want to be in duplexes with their own backyards. So you got to make sure that you have something for everybody in their age and stage. So these are just some pictures of within the crossing proper. Those some duplexes. If you go back here, there's a little sort of water body you see. I have a mouse, I keep forgetting. That little water body and this trail, right? Whoops. Let me just go forward. That's there. And it's kept in a naturalized state, and it's open space around it, and there's walking trails around it. Not that this would necessarily, again, be popped into this landscape, but it's an example of the thoughtfulness that went into the design. And then you can see some of the building form. So the request is to rezone and redesignate to R4 to allow 3 or 4 apartment buildings to be determined. And the remainder of the parcel will require zoning, designating change, and then it'll have to go through subdivision and all of that process. Simply today, we're asking for council to initiate that process. And I just threw up there the R4 zone permitted uses, so you can see what that would look like, what would be permitted in there through different approval processes as of right and site plan. You do not have development agreements, which we've talked about at length before. So your main tools here are site plan, as of right, and subdivision, all of which catch different things at different parts of the process. So I just we've talked so much, and people have talked to you probably at length about housing need at different scales. But your housing assessment report was very clear, and this is a snapshot right out of it. As of the end of '22, there was a gap between housing demand and available supply of about 75 units, including both market and non-market. So the market can supply some houses, non-market would be rapid housing, for example, or other types of housing on the continuum. But here's the really interesting thing, and Kentville is not unique in this particular need. Projections suggest that to keep pace, the municipality will need 385 units by 2027. Like, yesterday was 1996 for me, 2027 seems like seconds away. And 790 by 2032. Status quo construction may not be enough to meet the 2027 projected demand. And so the gap is growing, and that is consistent with CMHC data, which is published every year in November, that looks at how Canada is doing. And, you know, last year, Nova Scotia projected a gap, I think, of 50,000 units. Now it's in the same time period, we're going to have a gap of 70,000 units. We talk about the housing crisis all the time, but there is a definite lack of supply. Not all of it will be met by the market. Some of it will have to be met by community housing or other kinds of housing. But today, we're just talking about market housing, which is a part of the solution, for sure. The other thing I just wanted to mention in passing is this is in your wellfield zone, and it's also currently industrial. Based on my years in municipal government, industrial land is always really hard to find if somebody's looking for it. The challenge with your industrial land, it happens to be in your wellfield zone, which is unfortunate. So I just sort of throw that out because we know it's a consideration. That can be considered through the planning process if that's something we need to think about and you want us to look at. But it is something to be, that we're fully aware of. So timing. So there was an aggressive schedule and a super aggressive schedule. So the aggressive schedule is the revised schedule based on staff feedback. The super aggressive schedule is the proposed schedule. And guess which the developer and I put together for you. So they're basically the same. One sort of you get through the process, anticipated through the process sometime in June. The other is July. You know, both of these are probably acceptable. The challenge is, you know, so the details of that you can discuss, your staff can explore that a little bit with you. The revised schedule isn't really expedited. There's no really any special meetings. There's nothing new in it besides that you just have to move quickly between the meetings. That's it. The first schedule that's in the report, the letter I sent to you, does require first reading and committee, what do you call it, CAC, at the same time. But why? Why expedited schedule? You know, we're talking about contributing to your complete community. That's why expedite. So there's concern about losing a building season. I mean, and it's a real concern. And I thought, you know, when I came here, I thought, why does that matter to you, right? Besides the pent-up need. But I can't tell you how expensive it's becoming to build. And, you know, we talk about the inflation getting under control, but it's not going negative. So I pulled this from the Nova Scotia Department of Finance statistics. If you're not on their email list, you should they send around amazing statistics. So this is Halifax. Mitch can probably talk about how our costs relate to Halifax, but we're not so far away that they are significantly different. So this is building construction cost components, Q2, quarter 2 of 2023 versus Q2 of 2022. So just take a moment to absorb what inflation is doing to the cost of things and really think about whether or not that inflation is ever going to go into a negative place. You know, are wood and plastic and composites, they might increase less quickly. Demolition, 3.4, concrete, 8.1. Utilities. All utilities went down, but it'll be interesting to see where they got that information from. Earthwork, 5.2. You know, all of these things every year get more expensive. Wages don't go down, they go up. So inflationary costs are a real consideration for developers. And every year we wait means that it costs more, and then the next year, the cost of construction goes up, and that just means that the price of the end product to the purchaser or the renter goes up. The other reality is, and you're probably more aware of this than I am, there's a municipal election in the fall. And not that that's a huge issue, but it's always hard for a new council to get their head around something like this. And it would be, you know, it is a consideration for us because often, you know, you don't meet in August, or most don't. Then September, October, and then you're in a new council in November, and then right into budgeting. It does make a pace does change for the first 6 months. I see everybody's shaking their heads, so I'm not wrong on this, right? You agree. The pacing does slow down, and there's such a big learning curve, right? And really, it's about meeting that demand for both the developer, the demand to provide product and homes, and for you to make sure that you're meeting your residents' need. That demand is not going anywhere. It is clear that that is going to stay around for a while. So, with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Bryson, and he has a few words that he'd like to say.
Crystal, before you turn it over, can you please put up, let's go to the slide, the land use bylaw slide, just to have something up there. There, that's a good one.
That one?
That one's good, or the one before that. And the reason that I've asked you to leave that up there is once Mitch is finished speaking, we will call on our planner, Carolyn, to come up and, you know, kind of, I guess what I'm looking for from her is with regards to the timeline, because I don't believe she was involved in the actual discussion in this room with our staff at that time.
That's correct.
And then just, once we put a motion on the floor and council starts to discuss, they're going to have questions, and I'm sure that it'll be for all of you, so I want us to have some frame of reference just to get back and forth, if that's okay with you, to leave that up there.
This is for you. I recognize that there was a transition. I'm sorry I didn't get to say goodbye to Kirsten before she left on leave, but the timeline was run by Kirsten, and I did take her input, and then we adjusted it again.
Yeah.
But certainly it wasn't done with Caroline, and it wasn't, I wouldn't say staff necessarily endorsed it. It so much was what I thought could happen based on staff input, so I don't want to
Yeah.
lead you astray on that. So use my presentation as you need.
Thank you, thank you. Mitch, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having a special meeting to try to expedite this process. I'm not sure where to start, so I'm going to have to start with a bit of the past. Within the last couple of years, I decided to grow my business in the valley and to sell my assets in the city, which I did. So I came to Kentville, I went to Wolfville. I'm the gentleman that has the 670 units in Wolfville that their council unanimously passed for me. I came here, I thought McDougall Heights was a slam dunk. I knew there was 2 councillors that weren't going to support it, but I thought it would have 5. Anyway, when it finally came to a vote, for whatever reasons, albeit political, or stormwater, which we talked about stormwater in a nauseam, I'm just sick of the word stormwater anymore. It never was a thing. It got turned down. I now find myself somewhere between $150,000 and $200,000 in planning and legal and other fees. I have a piece of land that's barely worth the trees that are on it because there's no zoning. That totally caught me off guard. During that period of time, I made a substantial deposit on a piece of land at Syrian. To be honest, if it hadn't been for that, I'd have walked away from it, and I didn't. So we're now back here. I would like to build in Kentville. It's the same product we talked about before. It's no different. There's no different house. There's no different stormwater. There's no different traffic. There's no different sewer. There's nothing any different here, except we don't have all the people in McDougall Heights saying they don't want it. So what we're asking for, and what I'm asking for, is for council to show me they're interested in growth and development, and they're going to stand behind it. Listen to the staff, listen to the experts, listen to the people that know, and support a project of this size here. And if you are, great, let's move down that road. If you're not, then I've got other places I can go to build and do what I'm going to do. I presently have 60 homes under construction in the Annapolis Valley, and none here, except for what I have in North Kentville. You have the Housing Accelerator Fund that is supposed to give you money to move these type of projects ahead. I can't see them giving you money if you're turning down good projects. What I brought here before was exactly what people are looking for. It's what the market wants. It's not what you want. It's not what I want. It's what the market wants. You have the housing needs that are in front of us. You know, is this something you guys can support? Are you interested in growth? Are you interested in development? If you are, let's get at it and see if we can do a good job and do the crossing here. I invite you all down to the crossing before to come and have a look. It's been a very successful community. We're on the 4th floor of a 6-story concrete apartment building, the first one ever built outside of Halifax today. I can fill 2 of them. Part of the problem with a guy like me is I'm gear-driven. I build all my own stuff. So when I decide that I wasn't going to go out of plot, I thought I'd be building houses in McDougall Heights this year. I have a partner in the city that's interested in coming to build an apartment building. Right now, we're not building nothing here this year. Nothing. So you have to take your men, your money, and go somewhere else. So I brought up the word money. From a financial point of view, if I go to a financial institution now and say I want to borrow some money for something in Kentville, what do you think the last rejection by council means to them? What do you think they say? They say, my God, Mitchell, why did you go there? They don't support this stuff. So those are the things that we have to get beyond in order for a project of this size to go. The one in McDougall Heights was probably a $150 to $200 million project. The last year, 1 year, at 5% inflation, is $7.5 to $10 million that the clients have to pay for. That's just gone. That's just out the window. So anyway, I stand here today saying, are you interested in having a crossing built in Kentville? If you are, I know the people that know how to build it, myself being one of them, and you have staff here that can look after the rest of it. If you are, I'm interested in doing it. If you're not, I'd rather know early in the game before I spend a whole bunch of money on it. Unfortunately or fortunately, I already bought the land. So if there's any questions for me, I'll answer them. If not, that's my little spiel. I had to share my disappointment on the last one. I just had to. I couldn't help it. Even though I'm asking to expedite the process, it did cost me a lot of money, and it was a very frustrating thing after coming to you and meeting with a bunch of you for a year, and then to find at the last minute that it wasn't going to go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitch. Carolyn, did you have anything that you wanted to add? Questions will be after we have I'll say the experts speak.
Good afternoon, Council. It is so nice to meet you in person. I'm Caroline Robertson, and I am the owner of C&D Community Design. And I've been your consulting planner for, I think, 4 months now, maybe 5. But I haven't had the chance to meet you in person. So as Crystal went over, I just want to kind of highlight why we need a municipal planning strategy amendment in this particular situation, and it has to do with mapping. So the future generalized land use map, which is part of your municipal planning strategy, has designated this particular piece of land as industrial and intended for a future industrial use. And then in addition to that, it's also zoned industrial. So in order for the development that has been proposed, which includes residential as well as some mixed-use commercial, the land will need to be rezoned. But first, we'll require a municipal planning strategy amendment, and we'll have to look at that land in general and what council would like to see done with it. From your own policies within your municipal planning strategy, you have policy IM1, which basically states that if an adjustment is a necessity due to changing circumstances, that's when council will consider a change to their municipal planning strategy. So what we really want to think about here is, as a big question, is whether council would like to see industrial as the future land use, or residential, and what the changing circumstances are. I think what's really as was stated by the client and the applicant, it is important to accommodate development and developers, but it's also important to place a high value on public feedback, as well as staff analysis and reporting, which I also think was mentioned there as well. So we're looking at a very, very tight timeline. Typically, a municipal planning strategy amendment takes about 4 to 6 months. We can do an amendment to the land use bylaw concurrently at the same time. Part of that to consider is how that will appear to the public. It's very important that council should they move forward with the expedited schedule, have a good public engagement plan in place to ensure that the decisions being made when it comes to whether the town requires that industrial land versus residential land, that the feedback coming from the public is there to help support the decision, as well as the necessary staff reports. And I think part of that will be looking at similar towns, looking at what kind of industrial land they have set aside, what percentage of their industrial land is used. Also looking at Nova Scotia as a whole and the housing crisis, what kind of housing demand there is, what kind of housing demand there is within the town itself. So these are going to be fairly elaborate reports to understand that piece that I started with, which is the adjustment to the necessity due to changing circumstances. In addition to that, Council does have policy 15.9.2.2 within your land use bylaw, which we've talked about a few times recently as we've done rezonings. And that evaluation criteria requires some significant detailed proposals from the applicant, which I'm sure Crystal is already aware of. But part of that is that Council may also request additional detailed plans. So some of the things that I would think about looking at with this particular development application is a stormwater drainage plan. There is a requirement for a traffic impact study if the development itself is expected to generate 100 or more two-way trips at the site entrance during peak hours. There's also landscape design as well as active transportation considerations and connections. So these are just some of the reports that may need to be considered and put within that very condensed timeline that was discussed and shown to you. With all that being said, I think it is possible for my team to do it. I acquired a senior planner today who is interested in assisting me on this project if council does wish to work with the developer on the condensed timeline. I just would like to see that the application proceed well and that council have all of the information, the data that they require to make the most informed decision. Yeah, so as long as council understands that accommodating that proposed schedule will require that council and staff arrange their own time and schedule, there will need to be special council meetings. There will need to be extra staff time put into this project. I think that it's worth considering. That would be my recommendation. I believe, if I look at the initiation report, which I believe what was distributed to you that was put together with Kirsten and Crystal. They provided council with 3 options. So the first would be to direct staff to accept and process a plan amendment application and expedite the application as outlined in the timeline that they've provided. The second would be to direct staff to accept and process a plan amendment application, but no expedite. but do not expedite the application. And then the third would be direct staff to accept and process the application pending the completion of the secondary plan, looking at how council wants to handle residential in the future. I do want to say with the third one, there's kind of an interesting possibility here, I think, if council is open to it, where there is that back portion of the lot. So we could expedite looking at the front, following all of the required procedures for a municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw amendment. And then we could perhaps look at a test site or some kind of innovative approach to this, to looking at a secondary residential study or changes to the municipal planning strategy that would open up and allow for more residential development to happen within the town. But that's just off the top of my head, reading the report, looking at it today, that there is some possibility there if there's appetite for council. So with that, I guess I can open it up to questions, and I hope I addressed any concerns that you might have.
Before we take questions for Caroline, Dave, Director Bell, could I get you to point out on our Wellfield Industrial page the planned new well? I realize that I'm bringing information from another committee that I chair with regards to the Kentville Water Commission. However, there's also plans underway to install a new well, which will change these circles again. So if you could just kind of point so that council.
I want to zoom in a bit. Certainly, Mayor Snow,
Okay,
thank you. You see where the large arrow is that on Crystal's report, that is the subject site. And our wellfield protection plan, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 zone A's that encompass our 7 wells. And the plan now is to drill an 8th well along the roughly 1,000 feet east of our most easterly well. So this is our most easterly well now on the screen. We'd be drilling an 8th well here this coming construction season of 24, which would create a new Zone A and then modify Zone B, which is this area. It would come out around and make a bigger Zone A, and may impact, it'll impact slightly Zone C and D to the east. So that puts the subject property, which is currently zoned industrial, in at least the front, the north portion of that property, in Zone B, with restrictions, certainly commercial and mostly industrial restrictions, the ones that aren't grandfathered. Like in the business park today, there are really not many heavy industrial uses out there. There's two concrete plants, 2 pie plants, and probably, I guess, 2 auto body shops. And those auto body shops have been there for a long time. There would be no further auto body shops permitted in our wellfield protection zone in B or Zone C. So certainly, from a wellfield protection, residential is always preferred over industrial use in that zone. The limits would be quite strict on anything other than commercial being built, commercial or residential in that modified wellfield protection area. Does that answer your question, Mayor Snow?
It does.
Yeah.
It does. Thank you, Director Bell. I just wanted the members of council who aren't on the Water Commission to be cognizant that there would be another well there, and it would change that line. And so as the discussion goes forward, as you said, it's preferable to have residential in an A and a B field rather than industrial.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you.
thank you.
So, council, we have our experts here. So I would open the floor to, I'm going to call them high-level questions. The question to you today is with regards to, as you have the report from the CAO, you've heard from Carolyn that she said there's actually 3 options here. One is, I did write them down, I just have to find out which page I wrote them on here. One is that staff proceed with the expedited, that we direct staff not to expedite, and we direct staff to wait for the secondary plan. So my intention was to put a draft motion on the floor that was, that council support the expedited planning process and compressed timeline for phase 1. And as presented in the attached documents, an amend process will not compromise, the amendment process will not be compromised by the change in the timeline and is supported by staff. So considering what you're going to be asked of today, I would ask that you use that criteria when asking your questions. So we are not doing first reading or second reading, or that we're approving the proposal. What we are doing is that we are permitting the proposal to go forward in an expedited manner. So, council, questions, and we've got the experts here, so whether your question is to Caroline, to Crystal, or to our Director of Engineering, please direct your questions as such. Councillor York.
Thank you. I'm just seeking clarification from the chair. We have 2 proposed schedules in front of us, and both of them were referenced as being expedited throughout the process. Are we looking at proposed schedule or revised schedule?
That's a very good question. We are looking at the revised.
Thank
That's the
you.
one that our staff
Okay.
had input. So
Thank you
yes,
very much.
Thank you. All right, are there any questions for our planning folks or for our Director of Engineering? And I keep pointing to our Director of Engineering because I know that him and Kirsten consulted on this a lot, so he's got a good working knowledge of what was going on. Councillor Gerard.
Thank you, Your Worship. First of all, Crystal, I think you said a potential 2,000 units on a piece of land, about 100 acres and about 20, roughly.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Councillor Gerard. So ultimately, for the whole site, it could look like that, but that's sort of a step 2, a phase 2. What we're looking for today is just on that phase 1 parcel. So if I can,
And I'm just wondering, and this one goes to Mitchell, what is a timeline, Mitchell, that you foresee this being? Because ultimately, my question's gonna go to Dave and capacity for sewer.
No one calls me Mitchell unless they're mad. That's been going on for 60 years.
so just before Mitch answers that, it's really important to recognize that we could get really deep in the weeds on this, but we haven't submitted the application. So Mitch has a more than passing knowledge, as does your director, about the sewer. And that will come as part of the application, all those details, but with that.
What was your question?
I'm wondering a time frame to have, say, 2,000 units on there. And I know this is very preliminary.
2,000 units would probably be of the higher end. I got 20 units per acre in Wolfle, because Wolfle's Wolfle. And I'm not doing a whole bunch of ground cover. Ground cover is R2s and R1s. In Wolfle, I'm doing, I think, 60 units of ground cover and 610 units of 6-story apartment buildings. So for this here, 2,000 would be on the upper end. How long it'll take, it's market driven. The crossing's been on the go for 12 years. I probably get 800 or something in there now.
Okay, yep.
And, you know, I can't really tell you. If the market opens up, which when you start the process, then you hit the marketing hard. We backed off on the marketing of Kentville due to of what happened. We just stopped it. we just took Kentville basically off the radar. It's not on anyone's social media or anything. Once you ramp that back up, because you know you're going ahead, then you'll have an idea how big to make your first phase. I hear talk of just the first phase here, but the whole thing for us has to be residential. And there's great separation there between that and the industrial by the gorges that run down through there. So there's not gonna be a conflict between the two, because you get those big, deep gorges that run down through there. So it's all to the market, whatever the market will absorb. Right now, we have a need from what they're telling us, and if you go with half of that need,
Yep.
then that's 400 units.
Then that would ultimately make this question for you, Dave. What is the sewer capacity? And at what point do we go, things have to be revamped? And the only reason I ask is because what's been going on for the last 2 years with the sewer, the smell, the breaking of the pipes, the whole.
Sure. We, as a user of the regional sewer system, have pre-purchased or pre-allotted in our agreement a certain flow and a certain strength of sewer. So we're at roughly 50% of our allotted hydraulic load. How many hundreds of thousands of gallons or liters, or we're at roughly 50%. We're higher than 50% in our organic load, and that comes from such things. I guess another good reason to talk about residential versus industrial commercial. The biggest users of, certainly from a strength perspective, would be our industry, and we certainly need our industry, but pie plants and manufacturing plants and things certainly put out a much higher strength than residential. But we have capacity allotted in the system. I'm not saying, there certainly have been issues, as you know, with odor. They've spent several $million through the management of the system at the County of Kings, and are working on that now of the treatment. And I'm confident the treatment system will be able to handle what it was designed to do 45 years ago. It was definitely in need of an upgrade, and those upgrades are nearly complete. The force main issues, that's just end of life issues. So that force main is again 47 years old. The last phase is the portion that's within the Kentville limits along the Harvest Moon Trail that they've had numerous breaks in the last 5 months. That again also is scheduled to be replaced most likely as early as this upcoming fiscal year construction season. But the capacity we've told, we've been asked, of course, by the municipality. They know we have, not we, but within the R5 land, currently zoned R5 in that general area, and then even these other a few hundred acres that are currently zoned industrial. We've told them we have 700 plus acres that are going to be developed, and I've let them know that even this proposal, phase 1, could be in the 500 units, and that they need to make sure that they have the capacity to get it to the plant. That's if there's a bottleneck, it's in the transmission of the lines to get it from Kentville to the treatment plant in New Minas. But that's just capital upgrades that are necessary, because we as a partner and a user really of the system have been allotted that capacity, and upgrades will have to be done. Not to do 100 or 200 units, but to do 2,000. There will be upgrades needed at the pumping station side of things. The plant is certainly have capacity to handle especially residential load. Residential waste is very easy to treat. It's the industrial waste that's difficult.
So technically, a full capacity, the 2,000 or whatever it ends up being, wouldn't double the, okay.
Definitely wouldn't double. And
Okay.
Today's systems are much tighter. You don't have, when with the older systems that are in town and on the limits of the County of Kings that run through, Colebrook system runs through our system to get from west to east. We see wet weather flows that can tenfold the dry weather flows. That wouldn't happen in a new development. Your tighter systems, your new gasketed pipes and tighter manholes, you don't see the infiltration. You certainly wouldn't permit roof drains and sump pumps and that nature. That's what overwhelms our system during rain events and spring runoff and ice melts. but that wouldn't be the case in a new residential development.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Counselor York.
Thank you, and this is a question for our planner, so my apologies, I'm gonna bring you back up to the microphone. However, as we're looking at this and we make an MPS change, does that trigger any other changes to the MPS that we might have a blind spot for at the moment? I feel, I want as much information as I can before I proceed, but I am cognizant of it changing from industrial that's surrounded by sort of R2 industrial as well as R4, R5. Does that impact those other zones if we make those MPS changes?
No, not at this point in time. So the residential land is zoned, is designated residential within your future
Okay.
generalized land use map within your municipal planning strategy. So the easiest and fastest approach would be to take that designation and stretch it to this property as well.
All right, thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. Through the chair, probably to the planner. So I think you pointed out policy IM-1, and that talks about being the intention of council to consider amendments to the MPS when, for example, an adjustment is necessitated due to changing circumstances and additional information, et cetera, studies. So when we talk about that well field and the industrial land and it being rezoned, and it being, it's okay, and it being rezoned, and I also heard Director Bell say that it would make more sense for it to be residential than industrial. So with regards to that in industrial lands, do we have enough industrial lands? Is it fine to give up that much industrial land?
We're at very high level here with this request. They're asking for the expedited process.
Okay.
I think if council wishes to proceed with the expedited process, that an analysis of available industrial land, whether this particular piece of land is good for industrial purposes,
Right, yeah.
those types of analysis will need to be done and be part of the staff reporting that will come forward with the municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw amendment. So I wouldn't get too deep into
Into that part of it?
those details, yes, because ideally staff will have those answers for you as we move through the process.
Okay. So when you talk about parts of the MPS and the LUB that would have to change, and I'm sorry if I missed it because there's quite a bit of information today, there's certain parts of the MPS or the LUB that you see needing to change? Well, there's probably quite a bit. Obviously, I think.
I
we all
apologize.
recognize that.
Yes.
Okay.
So the applicant's request, and an application hasn't actually been submitted. So the client is interested in submitting an application simply to change that land in the future generalized land use map to residential, and then to have it rezoned in order to allow 4-unit buildings. So those are two zoning map changes. However, and it's been my understanding in my conversations with staff that council does have an interest in looking more deeply at residential development as a whole and creating really lovely communities that people want to live in, because there's a demand right now. You're close to Halifax. There's a lot of people looking for housing and affordable housing. So there could be more changes to the municipal planning strategy as well. That would change that expedited timeline.
I understand.
But it's something that could and most likely should be considered in the future.
Okay, thank you.
CEO, did you wish to say something to council?
Your worship, through members of council, just some assurance for you that all of these details that you're concerned about will only come to light after we begin the process, and we probably should have spent a little more time on the exact timelines, but you will notice there is significant time. All of the public processes are in this timeline, and the feedback that you will receive from the community will be taken into consideration in this process. all of the questions, including, it's a little too early for us to get into the engineering side of things. You would leave that to our staff to work with, with our partners across, our neighbors in developing solutions for that. So from council's perspective, is this a good development? And other, in terms of the questions, like, in terms of the infrastructure and the sizing and all of that, that you should leave to our staff to come back and tell you how we're going to deal with it. As I indicated to council before, we're going to get lots of this in the next few years as council starts to develop all of the lands. And the issue of capacity has been on staff's mind. And clearly that means that there's things we have to do on our side to address the future growth. But in terms of capacity for this project, we're well within, at least until we see all the details, we're well within our design capacity. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, CAO. Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you. And through the chair to the CAO, perhaps. It says on the staff feedback revised schedule that on April 8th CAC, staff determined that there was a preference to not hold a special council the same night as CAC. That delay then goes from April the 8th to first reading on April 29th, whereas we could do a first reading on April 8th. I'm just wondering why they didn't want to entertain doing a special council meeting at that particular time.
The day is us, staff. We are the ones who asked for the first reading in April 29th. There's a number of things that we're aware of, and the council has budget deliberations that are on the same time, and we spoke to the consultant about the other pressures you've got for that day, and budget discussions usually occupy a lot of your time. So in consideration of what is on the agenda for CSC on April 8th, we asked that that consideration be given to having the first reading on April 29th. However, if it's council's desire to have it on the same day, we certainly can. It's not. It'll certainly please the developer if we do that. But we're giving consideration to staff and council and what's on our agenda around that time.
So maybe not having it on that night, but sometime in the weeks following before April 29th, so we can move it up a little bit. Is that possible? Or are we still weighed down with things? So I'm thinking we're looking at Monday to the next, second month or second week or whatever, 2 weeks or 3 weeks later.
So Your Worship, through you to council, this schedule is acceptable. I understand they can tell us now. The revised schedule is acceptable to the developer, okay. And so it's we're hopeful that we don't want to change too many things around here. It looks like we want to have enough time for the public to be able to participate at the various stages, and for council to be able to process the feedback that they get, but also for staff to be able to process, and similarly with the developers, it gives us a little time to talk back and forth and ensure that whatever comes forward is I guess meets everybody's needs.
Okay, if that works with the developer, then I'm good with that too. Thank you.
All right, council, how about if we put the motion on the table and we can have discussions? So the motion based on our staff feedback is that council support the expedited planning process and compressed timelines for phase 1. as presented in the attached document. The amendment process will not be compromised by the change in the timeline and is supported by staff at revised schedule. Thank you. Councillor Zabian for the motion and Deputy Mayor for the second. Thank you. So it has been moved and seconded that council support the expedited planning process and compressed timelines for Phase 1 as presented in the attached document. The amendment process will not be compromised by the change in the timeline and is supported by the staff in the revised schedule. Is there any further discussion on this matter? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. So it would be our understanding that C&D would be the planners that would work in tandem with staff on this?
Sorry?
It would be C&D, Caroline, and her staff that would be working with our staff on this?
Yes.
As we move forward?
Yes, Your Worship. The consultant, C&D, is the one who will retain somebody to work specifically on this project because of the compressed timelines. And in the meanwhile, the new CAO, the incoming CAO, will discuss with Director Bell, the go forward position in terms of a robust planning department or whatever it is we need, and it might be that. And the consultant is aware that we're looking at some options,
Okay.
but it's not for me to discuss as I'm out of here and he's going.
That's great. No, that answers my question. Thank you very much.
Are you ready for the question? The question is on adoption of the motion to support the expedited planning process and compressed timeline for Phase 1, as presented in the attached document. The amendment process will not be compromised by the change in the timeline and is supported by staff in the revised schedule. Voting is now open. Voting is now closed. And the motion is carried. Thank you very much. And there being no further business at this meeting, this special council meeting is adjourned, and the time is 5:10. Thank you very much for your work this evening.